We are going to do kind of a travel/photography education webinar centered around photography in southern Utah's 5 national parks. We're going to cover the following. I'm sort of seeing this as like a photo road trip for the participants. So I'm going to cover where these parks are and how to get there, some trip logistics. Then I'm going to go into the specifics of the 5 parks with some pictures of all of them. Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands, and Arches. Then at the end of each park, I have what I'm calling a tech tip, which is just a slide or two about something that is relevant on how to improve your photographs in some of the parks that we've just seen. So that's our agenda for today. And without any further ado, I'm going to get started. So a photo trip to southern Utah. These are the 5 national parks. They are going from lower left to upper right, Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands, and Arches. A true national treasure, and it's a little far from Southern California, but once you get there, the really cool thing is that all these parks are within about a 2 hours drive of each other. So you could, with a lot of time, you could hit all 5 of them on the same trip, or you could do shorter loops and just hit some of them. Zion and Bryce is a very common loop, and the Arches and Canyonlands are done together. And as we'll talk when I get to Capitol Reef, that's sort of the bastard stepchild of these parks, but still a really nice place to go. It's right on the way between Bryce and Canyonlands. So these are the 5 parks. So St. George is in the down here in the lower left is about an hour and a half drive from Vegas. And if you're coming from the north, you're probably coming from Salt Lake City, and you'd probably get to Bryce or Capitol Reef first. Okay, so trip logistics, getting there. How do we get there? You can fly, and you would fly to either Las Vegas and rent a car or to Salt Lake City and rent a car. From Vegas, as I mentioned, Zion is maybe a 2-hour drive. And from Salt Lake City, it's probably 4 or 5 hours. And then you can obviously go back to the airport you started from when you're done. So that's how you get there. You can drive. From the furthest one away is Arches. And from the western Los Angeles suburbs, you got to figure about a 12-hour drive with eating and some occasional driving breaks. As I said, once you're there, figure it's only about 2-hour driving time between the parks. So it's really easy to get around in these parks. And as we'll talk, they're pretty easy to self-guide once you get there. So where do we stay? Because we can't do this in a day. Zion and Bryce have national park lodges inside the parks. I have stayed at the Bryce one, and it's a nice lodge, small. And Zion has one that I have never stayed at, so I can't recommend it one way or the other. But it does have the advantage. Zion is kind of a longer park to drive back and forth in, and the lodge puts you right in the middle of the action.
No, we stayed outside.
Just outside.
Other than Canyonlands, all these parks have low-cost motels nearby. Canyonlands is the motels in Moab, which is right next to Arches, are probably 45 minutes plus away from Canyonlands, but that one is really in the middle of nowhere, so there's not many services. So when do we go?
Well, this is important.
There's 4 seasons. If you go in winter, the snow can add some nice highlights, and I've shot in these parks twice in winter. So I'll show you some pictures of snow in these parks. They're less crowded in the winter. Bryce especially can be very cold. So, if you want to do this in the winter, you need to be dressed appropriately and can put up with, I shot at Bryce in February, and it was single digits on the amphitheater rim. So it really does get cold there because of the elevation of the park. Fall, the leaves can add some really nice highlights to your photos and viewing.
A lot of trees.
The summers are hot and they're crowded. Having said all this, you know, kind of whatever floats your boat. All the seasons have advantages and disadvantages. So I wouldn't say there's a best season or a worst season.
Good.
And these are just some of the considerations about when to make your trips.
Best time.
So planning your trip, there's resources you're going to want to put together, maps. I use the DeLorme atlases for the states for the state of Utah. So that's a good one. National Geographic has maps for a lot of these parks. So those are the kinds of things you're going to want to assemble. Guidebooks are really helpful. So Google photo guidebooks for, say, Zion National Park and see what comes up. I put one in the deck over here on the right side that's written by a guy named Brent Edge, who this is kind of like the photographer's Bible for Arches. He lives in Arches and has I think he at least once was a policeman there, but he ran a side business of guiding. So he wrote the book and he guides people, but this is a very thorough, complete guide of all the really good places to shoot. And I've used it on my Bible there for 3 trips. So this is the kind of resource you're going to want to put together to have a really enjoyable trip. Friends who've been there, that would be people like me. You can always ask them questions. And there's always the internet. So go onto the internet and Google best places to photograph in Canyonlands National Park. And most of the time you'll come up with some blogger who hopefully knows what they're talking about, who has put in some information about this. So those are all resources that I use when planning trips to these parks or any other place I want to go to. And you're going to kind of want to assemble information from all of these sources. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the individual parks, and we're going to go from the lower left to the upper right on my map and start with Zion. So Zion is a long, skinny park. It's Zion Canyon, I think, might be Zion Canyon National Park is the full name. And it has, it's a great park to shoot in. It has a number of good spots that I'm going to go through in a second. It's like Arches. It's I guess the way to say it would be, it's very linear because basically most of the park, not all of it, but most of it is in a long, narrow canyon that has a single road that goes up it. So these are some of the places to photograph in Zion. I made my rule when I put this deck together was I was only going to include places that sort of, let's call us ordinary people can get to. So the subway is the one exception to this, but I put it in anyway because there really are some great photo spots there and it's kind of famous for shots within Zion. So other than the subway, every other spot in this deck is something that you can either you can shoot from practically your car or a reasonably doable hike that will get you out to the spot. So within Zion, the Narrows is also a famous spot for photography. You are going to be in the Virgin River for all of the hike. So my main recommendation to you on this, and I'm serious, rent a dry suit. There's outfitters on the outside of the park that will, for about $50, put you in a dry suit and neoprene booties. And unless you're there in July or August, you really want to do this because it just gets cold for being in water that'll go as high as your thighs anyway for hours and hours. So, but it's a great spot to photograph. You will need to bring a lot of equipment because you have to have a tripod in addition to your camera and a dry bag. And then it's kind of clumsy getting around in the dry suit, but you don't have to go very far, a mile or 2 up the river and you're in all the good photo spots and it's a great spot to shoot in. There's a few grand landscapes that I'll go into. And fall can be especially nice there. Fall for Zion, especially in the canyon, is early November, and you will get lots of yellows and some reds. In the higher elevation parts of the park, fall might be in late October. But fall, I've only been designed in the fall, and it's to take advantage of the fall color. So without further ado, we'll get into some pictures. So this is part of Archangel Cascades. It's on the hike to the subway. There's several shallow waterfalls like this one, where the water, it kind of widens so the water is not so deep, and it goes over a series of cascades like this. You can easily walk across this, so you can compose from either side, easily from either side of the, and this is the North Fork of the Virgin River. So you can compose easily from either side. And in this one, I'm kind of just standing in the middle. Again, you will have to drag a tripod along on this hike, which is another reason it can get kind of tedious. So Archangel Cascades, this is inside the subway itself. This is kind of a slot canyon that has actually gotten circular with just a hole up in the top. The person in this photo is our own Suzanne Tanaka, who she and her husband went with me on this trip in, I think, 2001. And these are the kinds of images you can get in there. So another classic shot from Zion.
What?
Without what?
Archangel Cascades.
I hear people, if somebody, I can hear you guys. So somebody shout if you have a question. That might be easier than using chat. No questions. Okay, so next picture, we're in the Zion Narrows, pretty far up. And there was a person down there practicing social distancing, so quite some distance from me. And they didn't know I was shooting them, so, but they had a nice red jacket on, and they stood still enough that they were captured reasonably clearly in this picture. But these are the kinds of images you can get inside the Narrows. I have one more on a slide or two here. But great spot to shoot. Highly recommend it. Don't be put off by being in the water. It all works out fine. You can see though that you, like in this picture, there is no way around to just getting. That's probably knee deep in that area, so there isn't much alternatives to getting wet if you want to go up.
You have your tripod?
Yeah, you got to take a tripod with you too. So it's. I say it's only 1 to 2 miles, but it's very clumsy because you've got the dry suit and a tripod and, trying not to fall over. So it's kind of slow going. I think on both of I've been there 3 times. Generally, that's an early afternoon start at the latest because you have to take the shuttle bus to the trailhead, which is 45 minutes. And then there's a bit of a walk, and then you're in the water for a long period of time, both going up and going back. So it's going to be a trip of several hours. And by the way, it's great for non-photographers. The second or third time I was in there, I had 2 non-photographers with me, and they loved it. Said it was one of these life-changing experiences. Mm-hmm. So highly recommend the Narrows. So this is a couple of grand landscapes. This is the Watchman. Again, one of the classic shots in the park. There is a series of bridges over the Virgin River north of the visitor center and south of the lodge. And people go there and set up and shoot sunset on the Watchman. So many shots have been taken of this, but it's a nice spot for photography. This is the Towers of the Virgin. It's behind the Human History Museum. So this one you can practically shoot from your car. So just go to the Human History Museum, get out, park, get out, walk behind it, and you can get this picture. This is a sunrise shot. You kind of have to hope you get a good sky. Otherwise, it's not an especially strong composition. And the one time I did this, we had a pretty good sky. So Towers of the Virgin. So that's the Christian part of it. For the pagan part, if you look at the peak on the right side with the red stain coming down it, that is called the altar of sacrifice. So you can zoom in on that one, I guess, if you want less of a grand landscape and a close up. So in Zion, this was all sort of by excluding the Native Americans, this is all pretty much mapped and discovered by white people, and they were Mormons from Salt Lake City. So many of the features, the geographical features, have biblical names. I'm going to move on. So last but not least, I promised you a fall color shot. So this is in early November in the Narrows, and we did catch some occasional bright yellow trees, and you'll see some reds in there too if you get lucky. So these are some examples of shots in Zion National Park.
Pete,
Yes.
you mentioned every season other than the spring. Why is that?
Well, I think partly because I've never been to any of these parks in the spring or summer, so I'm not that knowledgeable about it, and I'm not sure there's anything remarkable to call out about the springs. For these parks, I'm kind of a fall and winter person, and that again is biased based on my experience and to some degree on the available photography. The spring, you probably could not go in the Narrows because it would be too flooded from snow melt.
Ah.
I'm going to move on. So next part.
Before you move on, Pete,
Yes.
2 things. Everybody who still has their microphones on, you're interrupting the whole presentation, including the people with iPhones. Some of them have.
Steve, I'm going to try, but you guys should mute yourselves unless you want to talk to me. I'm going to try and mute all again. I thought I did that.
Well, if they logged in afterwards, they don't get muted.
Okay, I'm muting everybody again.
One other question first.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, go
When
ahead.
you're walking in the Narrows, did you put your camera and gear in a dry bag?
I didn't use a dedicated dry bag. I think, let's see, when I've been there by myself, I just double wrapped it in plastic garbage bags. I was in there once with Suzanne Tanaka, and I think she actually used a true dry bag. But you definitely, I should have mentioned this. Thank you, Steve. If you ever do this, you definitely have to be very careful about protecting your camera gear. So I have managed to never fall in, but it is a constant threat that you could stumble and, go over. So you definitely have to protect your camera gear. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody. I think we'll do this. Actually, I really want you guys to be able to ask me questions. So if you guys would be good citizens and mute yourselves unless you want to talk to me, that would be super. Okay? And
So is
yes.
that the thing in the bottom?
Yeah, on the lower left, the microphone icon, click it, and you should see a red slash through it.
Okay, we're not going to be muting you though, right?
No, you should still hear me, right? Yes? Orly, can you hear me? Wave. Yeah, Orly can hear me. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So my first tech tips. So tech tip number 1, since I showed you a lot of water shots in this one, I'll talk about shooting moving water. These are what you're going to need. Tripod, some sort of a variable, some sort of a neutral density filter, either a variable or say a 5 times one would be a good choice. The biggest advice about shooting moving water is shoot in the shade, either a cloudy day or when you're in the Narrows, it's always shaded, but you don't want hot spots in your water pictures. So I've shot a large number of waterfall pictures, and I have exactly 1 out of scores that was shot in direct sunlight that actually worked. So pretty much shoot in the shade and experiment with different speeds and see what happens with the look of the water. Okay, so Bryce, and again, I will, if you want, unmute yourself and ask me a question. Okay, so Bryce is one of the smallest national parks. It's very compact. It's basically a large basin with trails around the rim and 1 or 2 across the basin. It is almost all the shots are available are from the rim. You could go down into the hoodoos and get up close, but the shots you've seen are going to be mostly from the rim. Sunrises are considered best. Some say it's a life-changing experience. And it's unlike a lot of outdoor landscape photographs. This one is actually best done on a clear morning. So if you're on a road trip and have some options for changing your days, try and do Bryce on a morning where there's forecasted to be no clouds. Okay, so I promised you some snow pictures. I have been there twice in the winter, and the first time there just wasn't much snow. Southern Utah is on or off about snow. So sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. This trip, I had set up everything flexibly, and I was on the verge of canceling the trip because I really wanted the snow in the amphitheater shots. And it turned out it snowed actually a day and a half before I was scheduled to be there. So some of the snow on the sides of the hoodoos had blown off, but I did get shots with reasonably fresh snow on them. So that was an exciting, check off on the photo bucket list for me. So this is a close-up of one of the hoodoos. This is the classic sunrise at the amphitheater shot. This was shot on my first trip there in 2010. And I couldn't figure out where I was from. I'm either at Sunrise Point or from Inspiration Point. Those are two of the three spots where it's commonly shot from. So completely clear morning, and within seconds of sunrise on the upper right-hand horizon, all those hoodoos just explode in light. So this is what the amphitheater will look like on a nice sunrise. So I want you to look carefully at the hoodoos, and particularly the ones in the upper left corner, and notice that they are straight up and down. And we're going to get to my next tech tip. So this is the original photo. And you can see that they're all sort of falling backwards away from the center of the picture. So this is what came out of the camera. So again, I'll go back, and you can see they're all straight. So pictures like this is just to my eye. Some people don't care that much. I think they're incredibly annoying. And I've seen, like award-winning photos in Outdoor Photographer where they still got an award even though there were aspen trees falling over backwards. So I would strongly encourage everybody to not do that. When you shoot things that are vertical with a wide angle lens, this is pretty much what your camera is going to record, but you can fix that. So tech tip number 2, correcting perspective distortion. First, you got to be aware of it and fix it. At Bryce in particular, there's been a gazillion falling over hoodoo shots made, unfortunately. To correct it in Lightroom, scroll down in the develop module and click in lens corrections, clip enable profile corrections near the bottom. And then right below that, there's a transform panel. You go into this and basically start playing around until you get as good a correction as you can. It probably is not going to be perfect. If you're in Photoshop, do edit and then perspective warp. Again, you're going to have to play around and until you get something that seems reasonably good. Let's see, it'll require some patience to get it right. And like I say, it probably won't be perfect. And you are going to lose some real estate in your picture to do this. So if you realize you're going to need to do perspective distortion corrections, be aware of that and make sure your picture is shot wide enough so that you don't lose something that's important in the picture. So I'm done with Bryce. We can take questions for a second, and then I'll move on to the next park. So I'll pause and see if anybody has anything on their mind.
Once the sun rises at Bryce, how long do you get those nice shots?
You can get them, particularly you can start to shoot close-ups like I did with the snow picture. But probably from when the first light touches it to when the sun is high enough to get down to the base of the hoodoos, that happens really fast, maybe a minute. And you'll have reasonable light for a few minutes, and then it will start to get a little harsh pretty quickly. So you definitely won't have time to change your spot. So, my practice is, get there while it's still light the previous day. And of the 3 spots, again, sunrise point, sunset point, and inspiration point, pick the one that, floats your boat the best. And that's where you're going to have to set up and take your pictures.
How crowded are those spots then?
I have been there in late October and I think late October twice, and it was a little crowded, not horrible. And I was there in February twice, and there's nobody around. So, you know, there'll be a few other people, but, you know, the cold weather is a pretty big discouragement. The rim of the canyon is 8,000 feet, so it gets quite cold in the winter. So there was not a problem, though, getting a spot to shoot from.
Hey, Pete, how wide a wide angle did you use? Was it a zoom or
It was definitely a zoom. Carl, without looking it up, I don't know, but the entire amphitheater is, it's either 24 millimeters, which would have been as wide as I could have gone, or, you know, close.
Thank
You know,
you.
it could have been 28.
Thanks.
Pete, I want to mention that there's a horseback ride or mule ride down the canyon, and it's really worthwhile. You see a lot of different perspectives from there.
Oh yeah, and so I'll mention in a lot of these parks, you know, for outdoor photographers, the daytime can be, middle of day can be kind of a downtime. So Bryce, there's it needs a car shuttle, but a lot of the year they have a shuttle bus. You can start at I think at the far south end is Inspiration Point, and you can hike down and all the way through the Hoodoos. And then back up probably at Sunrise Point. And then, as Mike says, if you want to go further down, there can be horseback rides that would take you down there. But if you have time and are there during the day, I would definitely recommend that. Okay, I want to move on unless there's anything else. Okay, Capitol Reef. So as I said, Capitol Reef is unfortunately the bastard stepchild of these parks. It's by far the least visited, and I have been there actually 3 times, but very briefly. I think my first time, my wife and I were there for I think we had 2 nights and a day, and we did some nice hiking. So we did get around to see a little bit of it, but there's I don't want to I don't want to slander this park because it's a really nice park, but there's maybe a little bit less to do there, and there's no moving water. There's only one small grove of trees, so this is pretty much rock. This is pretty much rock shots. Um, there's nice images. Most of them need a good sky. So if it's not your lucky day and all you have is a blank blue sky, that's going to be photographically a little bit troublesome. There is one great aspen grove by the visitor center that blooms, that I said is colorful in mid to late October. I was there once in November, and all the leaves had fallen off, so it has, you know, a couple of weeks, and there's probably good images in there. There's also a really nice arch that's a nice hike to get to. When I did not put that pictures of that arch in this deck because I was pretty time constrained, and I was there in the middle of the day, and it's too contrasty. You know, you have bright areas and shadows, so that didn't work very well for photographs. But the arch is a nice hike, and if you were there when it was basically in shade, that would be probably some nice images. Okay, so this is one of the cliffs, and you'll see I did have a nice sky up here. It looked like it was just about to rain, even though I was getting a lot of sun on this. So you can find lots of spots where there's interesting rock formations with kind of a decisive subject, and you know, all kinds of interesting things to put in your foreground. This is shot pretty wide. I think I'm around 20 millimeters here, and so the foreground is really more dominant than the cliff up at the top. So this is an example. And there's lots of these shots, so just got to go find them and set up for them. This is kind of a grand landscape. This is shot in the morning right behind I think it's the Capitol Reef Lodge. Anyway, it's the place we stayed. So I didn't have to walk more than 50 feet to take this picture. This is when my wife and I were there in 2013, And we did get some nice skies on that trip. So we had a nice dramatic sky. And if I'd shown you the picture taken 10 minutes earlier, the rocks wouldn't have been lit up, but the sky was all red. So you can get nice pictures like this at different spots in this park. And this is just kind of a middle of the day when we were hiking, and I just shot this kind of for fun, but the clouds up there did make a nice highlight for the image. Okay, so what do you do when the weather gods don't cooperate? I'll give you 3 suggestions. You can shoot at nighttime, and that's much easier than you would think. You can do black and whites. I didn't put this in my bullets, but you can also put on a polarizing filter, and that will often help things. You can minimize your skies, and you can also go for details. So the next picture is an example of just a detail shot that we saw on a cliff wall somewhere. And this picture had to be rotated and then flipped horizontally so I could get that interesting little, looks like, I don't know, an animal's jaws or something in the upper, the sweet spot of the picture in the upper right side. So you can, go for details and see if you can drag something out of that. So those are some suggestions when you have kind of blank skies when you're at these parks or anywhere else. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next park. Do I have any questions at this point?
Pete,
Yes.
I suggest there's a beautiful drive if you leave Bryce Canyon and go on Route 12. That'll take you through Escalante and Boulder. It'll take you up towards Route 24, which is in Capitol Reef. And Route 12 is a gorgeous road.
I
And
would
that's,
go. I'm sorry, Mike.
yeah, I just want to mention that. That's I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I have done that twice. And again, if you're doing these parks linearly from Bryce, you would drive to Capitol Reef on that route, and it absolutely, hands down, has to be one of the 10 most, if not 5 most scenic drives in the United States. And I almost put a picture in the deck of that, and I forgot. So when I revise this deck based on this meeting, I'm going to put that in. But spectacular drive. Anybody else? Okay. Canyonlands. Less visited, doesn't really have any facilities. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's more known for either grand landscapes or Mesa Arch, one of the granddaddies of all outdoor landscape photographs. So I have a couple of pictures from Canyonlands. This first, full disclosure, this is not taken from within the boundary of the park. This is from Dead Horse Point, which is a state park contiguous to Canyonlands. But I thought this picture gave the best representation of the gigantic landscapes and I think this is the Green River you're looking down at. This was as good a picture as I had in my inventory of what you can see from the top of the plateau. So this is on the east side of the park. On the west side, you would be standing in the park and you would see, again, more landscapes like this. So very dramatic at sunrise. In this one, I'm probably 20 minutes after sunrise at least. And I did that because these are very contrasty shots right at sunrise. You get great light up on top of the rim, but everything down low is in shadows. So sometimes I like this picture the best of all of them because you had light more evenly distributed throughout the picture. And I don't think I had a polarizer on, but between posts, I was able to dial down the harshness of the light, I thought reasonably well. So again, this is Canyonlands, AKA Dead Horse Point. Okay, so this is Mesa Arch. This is, again, one of the most iconic outdoor photos in probably the world. So I'll give you the bad news first. I have been there in mid-November and then most recently in February. The mid-November trip, there were 6 other people on tripods. And the February trip, there were 2 other people on tripods. So I had a pretty civilized shooting experience. Everybody was pretty courteous and everything worked well. And the one most recently in February, there was some guy who had some sort of oddball setup with his iPhone and blocked kind of a nice spot and was only in front of his camera for about a tenth of the time that he was set up in. So that was kind of annoying. But other than that, I've had pretty good luck at this. So if you go here in October, particularly on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, if you were to Google pictures of people standing in front of Mesa Arch, you can see a solid row of interlocking tripods with like, 30 people standing in front of a space that's maybe 40 feet wide. So it can be very difficult and pretty annoying to try and take pictures there. So I would, and I know I'm going to call on Carl Volpe in a second because I know he's been there, and other people have been there can tell me how many people were around, but it can be quite a hassle. So all that said, if you can be there when it's not so crowded, and use this is a complex photo, but use proper procedures, you can get a nice shot of the sun coming through the arch. I didn't put them in the deck, but if you stand on the right side of the arch and look left, there are some nice shots that are closer in of the rock formations to the left down in the canyon below you. So let's see. Anybody else want to share their Mesa Arch experiences?
Is this HDR?
Oh yeah, I'll get to how this photo is put together in a minute, Orly.
When I was there, there were about 20 people on top of the arch.
Yeah, that's really annoying too. That'll happen.
I think I was there about 1980. It wasn't crowded.
Yeah, that then was then.
I was there in 2006, and there were about 35 people there.
Yeah, it was kind of a hassle, I would suspect.
Oh, it was a hassle, but
Yeah.
the sun was further off to the left, so the washerwoman and all were in a little better position. But I love the shot.
Yeah, if you want it centered, so my two shots have been in mid-November and mid-February, so both about the same number of weeks on either side of the winter solstice, and this is about where the sun's going to rise. So if you're there, later in the winter and spring or earlier in the fall and late summer, the sun is going to be more to the left, maybe rising behind those mountains.
I just realized I was there in May.
Yeah. So yeah, then Carl, it would have risen much more to the left of this picture. So, you'll get different looks on this depending on the time of year.
So to center it, you get mid-October and mid-November?
Well, I think if you were there on let's work backwards, at the winter solstice, it would be more to the right. And a shot like this is going to be mid-November or mid-February.
Okay.
And then as you move more into the middle months of the year, it's going to be more to the left, maybe rising behind those mountains. So, it's most popular in October. That's when things are really insane. So if you are in the area in October, I wouldn't go to this place. It'll just be a big pain in the neck.
I second the motion.
All right, I'm going to move on. So how do you make a picture like this? So we have two tech tips. One is how to make sun stars, and the other is how to shoot HDR. So sun stars, you want a narrow aperture, f/18, 20, or 22. The picture I just showed you is f/22, the narrowest that my lens would go. And that's what gives you the long rays. Now, so I screwed this up. I actually should have shot a few seconds earlier, but it's helpful to compose with the sun partially behind something. So if I'd shot a few seconds earlier, it would have been a little lower, maybe behind the horizon. And if I'd shot later, and I have some images of that, it would be partially behind the top of the arch. So it's usually helpful, though, to compose with the sun partly behind something. Take off all your filters. You're going to struggle with lens flare as it is, and filters just make it worse. In particular, even though you might have read this somewhere on the internet, don't shoot these things with a polarizing filter on. I didn't put it in my bullets, but better quality lenses help. So, if you're shooting on, the Sony R series lenses or Canon L series lenses, that will help reduce your lens flare. And you need to be on a tripod. And the reason you need to be on a tripod is because you're probably going to want to do HDR. I'm going to go through best practices, not absolutely essential, but best practices for HDR photos. On a tripod. More images, go for 7 if you can, but 3 is maybe okay, but 5 or 7 is better. You're asking software to do a lot in blending this stuff together, so you want to make it as easy on the software as possible. Same number of stops apart. Like, don't shoot an image that's 1 stop from the previous one and then the next one a half a stop. Make every image a half a stop apart or 2/3 of a stop apart. In monitoring your exposures, you want 1 exposure with a histogram pulled away from the left side and 1 exposure with the histogram pulled away from the right side. So you don't drive yourself crazy when you get back in your den trying to process these. Mark the first and last image in any sequence. I do this by taking a picture of my fingers before I start the sequence. I put my fingers in front of the lens and take a picture, and I know I've started a sequence. And then at the end, after my last shot, I take another one with my pictures in front of the lens. So I've marked the end of it. Do yourself a favor. And if you've got moving plants or grass or something, maybe just move on to the next topic. There are software routines that can help deal with these things, but it's a struggle. Water usually works okay. But if you've got like moving leaves or something, you're really going to fight it to get a decent picture. And then how do you do this? It's actually highly complicated software is very easy. In Lightroom, you press the control key and highlight all 7 or whatever the number of the images in the sequence. And then on any one of them, right click, select photo merge, and then HDR. And the computer will start to do its thing. So it'll produce, again, if it was 7 images, it'll produce an 8th image that you could then move into the develop module and start to do more processing on it. So I'm going to move on unless there are questions. Orly, don't forget to mute yourself if you're not going to talk.
Pete, Mike, what focal length did you shoot the Mesa Arch with? You didn't mention that.
Oh, that's probably 20 also.
Okay, I thought it was pretty wide.
Yeah, again, many of us, the widest lens we have is 24 millimeter. So if this is really the photo you want in your photo bucket list and you don't own a wider lens, I would recommend renting one. And I'm pretty sure I'm around 20 on that one. But you will struggle to get everything in there with a 24. Okay, I want to move on. So last but not least, Arches, in some ways, the most fun of all these parks. It's very popular. Along with Zion, it's the most logistically friendly. It's about 20 or 30-minute drive north of Moab, depending on what part of Moab and what part of the park you want to talk about. And Moab is a decent-sized town. There's lots of motels and places and nice places to eat. And when you're thinking about motels to stay in, pick a motel in the north end of Moab, because driving through the city or town can be kind of a pain. So at the north end, there's a Holiday Inn Express, there's a Motel 6, there's some flavor of a Marriott up there. And I would recommend staying in one of those because it puts you noticeably closer to the park. And it is it's not terrible. It's a moderately annoying drive just to get into the park from where your motel is going to be. Somewhat long drive from Moab. There's many, many photo ops, and even better, there's lots of hikes for your downtime in the middle of the day. So I'm going to get started on pictures and arches. So this is a Delicate Arch. Again, another very iconic shot and on the license plate of all the cars in Utah. So, this was shot in February and there is still some snow on parts of the ground. The crow was wandering around there and it just wouldn't leave. So myself and another photographer promised it some power bar if it would stand in the right spot and look toward the arch. And after about 25 exposures, it actually did that. So I included the crow in this image. But we can also call this the Christopher Broughton Memorial Shot, who is always talking about putting people in your pictures. And so I put an animal in a landscape picture, but I think this helped the image quite a bit. So that's Delicate Arch. This is Double Arch shot at nighttime. There is a, you're facing north and west in this composition. And there's a rising near full moon right behind me. So it's still low on the horizon and lit up most of this area. So that's a little bit different look at, again, one of the more famous arches in the park, Double Arch. This is Delicate Arch again. And again, following Christopher's advice, I shot this with a human being in the picture. So this is straight out of the Brent Edge. This is why it's so helpful to try and either download internet research or guidebooks. I would say 98% of the people who go see this arch never even see this hole in the cliff on the way up there. But he describes it in detail in his book. And this is, it's a bit of a scramble to get up there and slightly precarious, but not terrible. And once you're up there, you can compose and do the, the arch within the arch type look. So that's a little bit different shot of this arch. There are some nice landscapes there. This is an area called, in the lower left is called Fiery Furnace. And those are the, darn it, Waysock Mountains? I don't know, you'll have to look it up, but the mountains to the east of the park. And you also see those in back of the Delicate Arch shot. So another nice, you can see a nice, off to the east of the park, you see some nice large landscapes. And let's see, this is, in addition to arches, there's all these funny rock formations. This is balanced rock from behind it, shot at nighttime. And for any astro geeks out there, you'll recognize the north end of the Milky Way. Yeah, because I'm standing southeast looking northwest in this picture. This one is more commonly shot from the side where it's the profile shows up a little better, but couldn't get the Milky Way behind it doing that. And then last but not least, another one of the many arches in the park. The Park Service cites 2,000 different arches of varying sizes, either in the park or around it. And so this is Broken Arch, so named because if you look at the top, you'll see those cracks on the left and right side of the top. So they call it Broken Arch, but there's hundreds of these things in total, and probably 15 or 20 of them. They're really nice photographs. So I could have gone on forever on this one, but in the interest of time, this is my last arch shot. So let's see, questions about arches before I move to the last tech tip? Okay.
I have a
So,
question.
oh yeah, fire away.
About how long was that Milky Way shot, the one with the balanced rock?
15 seconds.
Oh,
That would have been 15 seconds and 3200 ISO, most likely, either 3200 or 1600. And let's see, I did not have my astrophotography lens with me, so I had a wide zoom at f2.8. So that's probably f2.8.
thanks.
So looking in that direction, arches is very dark. So I didn't have too much trouble with light pollution. Arches is, a lot of people shoot nighttime photos at arch. Actually, that tech tip slide that you're looking at, going back to Delicate Arch for a second, a lot of people will go out there and shoot at nighttime. That arch is about a mile and a half walk back to your car on somewhat steep ground. So it would be a little bit of an adventure getting back to your car at nighttime, but it's doable enough. Just if you get lost, don't blame it on me. Tech tips number 6, extreme depth of field with no tripod. So I could not get a tripod up to this area, and even if I had, there wasn't really any room to set it up. But I'm confronted with an extremely wide or long depth of field, because the arch I'm shooting through is, I don't know, maybe 5 or 8 feet away, and then the delicate arch is 200 feet at least away from me, if not more. So what to do about that? First, as I think everybody on the call knows, narrow your aperture somewhere in f11 to f16. So the key thing is you have to focus behind the foreground. So I always use back button focus. So I don't have to worry about my focus being disturbed when I press the shutter button. So I pivoted to my left and put a focus dot on something that was about, I don't know, maybe 15 feet away, and focused there, and then rotated back and composed the image. And at that point, then I pressed the shutter button. So I'm trying to put some part of the image in front of the focus point, and then obviously the delicate arch in back of the focus point. So focus behind the foreground. Because I'm not on a tripod, I always use a 2-second timer for those kinds of shots. Stabilization is on. I hold my breath when I press and hold it during the 2 seconds. And I practice. So if you do this a lot, you'll get better at it and get reasonably clear shots by following these techniques. So I think that's all I have. So you can unmute yourselves if you want. And I really hope that I've inspired you to, first I hope that we had a nice hour to pass the time for the club members. And I really hope if you haven't been to these parks, I've inspired you to go or to go back again. So I'll take any questions and then we can move on. I'll call on Carl. I think he spoke first.
Yeah, what was the shutter speed on that?
On the one before?
Yeah.
I'm sure it was fast. I probably, there was plenty of light, but I might have been at 800 ISO just
Okay.
to get a fast
And
shot.
shutter speed was what?
Oh, I don't know. It's probably 1/250th at least.
Oh, okay, because I, given that you were saying you were holding your breath and things, you said, was he shooting it at 30th or
No.
something like that?
Just trying to use good technique, but I would imagine I was able to get 1/250th out of that shot.
Got it.
Hey, Pete, that was a great presentation. That was wonderful.
Oh, good. Thanks.
And I wanted to ask you, have you ever been to Cedar Breaks? That's along the road there.
I've been to that one once, and I was kind of in a hurry, and
No.
I didn't stay long. I struggled with that compositionally.
There isn't much there.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool
Right.
park, but people call it a poor man's Bryce Canyon. But I was there for maybe 2 hours, and I just kind of scratched my head, and I did something kind of dangerous and crossed the guardrail and to get a better position, and it just wasn't worthwhile, and I just moved on.
Hey, Pete, another nice road around Arches is Route 128. It's right north into Moab. You can take a right turn before you go up the hill towards Arches and go along the Colorado River. It's right there at the bridge. And that's a pretty drive as it goes out that way.
Is that driving south or?
It's driving east. You're driving east along the Colorado.
Oh, okay. Well, I've never done that. If I go back.
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
try
it's a
that.
gorgeous drive. If you
Yeah.
stay on it, you go up to a town called Cisco, Utah. It's got about 8 buildings and it's all run down. And you can eventually join I-70 up there. I've been out there several times in all these parks. And in Capitol Reef, we stayed in Torrey, Utah 4 or 5 times. And that's just right near the Capitol Reef. And you're following the, the river there, along Route 24. And there's another nearby park there. It's nice. That's the
Goblin National State Park.
The Goblins, yeah, the Goblin
Yeah,
National.
I've been at the Goblins. That's kind of fun. It's even though the Boy Scouts wrecked one of the formations, it's still fun.
That's right. Right after I was there a few years ago, they made the news of knocking one down.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, what is this?
Yeah, it's gorgeous country. Utah is a fantastic state. Great presentation.
If you have time, the Goblins. I'm saying this right, Mike. It's it's between Capitol Reef and Canyonlands on the way up to I-70. And that is definitely worth a stop. I didn't put it in
Yeah,
there. It's not a
yeah,
national park, so I skipped it.
it's a state park. It's the
Yeah.
state of Utah.
Yeah.
It's a it's up on the road. Up north is a Green River. It's another, you know, the Green River crosses I-70
Sure.
up that way.
Okay. Sorry.
Great pictures.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. That was amazing.
All right. Well,
Great.
thanks for listening, everybody. I'm going to stop share, and I'm hoping that the record worked, and we'll get that to Steve, who I think is going to get it out to the members, or he's going to put it on the
One
website.
more thing, Pete.
Yes.
We have another webinar next Monday at the same time, hosted by Debbie Aquino on the magic of content aware in Photoshop.
Okay.
So
Wow.
let me ask everybody if you found the mute button and the stop video buttons.
Yes.